When I heard a rough metallic creak at the cellar door, my heart stopped cold, because in that split second, I understood someone was living down there. I had gone to bed early that night, the way old bones insist, but the noise sliced through the cottage like a blade through cloth. At first, I told myself it was only the frost tightening the hinges, nothing more. Yet the whispering shuffle that followed sounded too soft for metal and too purposeful for wind. It reminded me of dry leaves scraping a window, only closer, as if the leaves themselves were breathing. The next night the shuffle returned, longer, almost restless. Rats, I thought. I pictured gray tails unraveling in the dark, teeth on potatoes I still kept for soup. But then a low-pitched thump traveled up the floorboards, heavy enough to rattle the pans on their hooks. Rats didn't move with that weight. My mind leaped to stray dogs, maybe the big mongrel that haunted the back lanes. Dogs could break boards, chew wiring, bring fleas, and worse. I gripped my cane, heart pounding, determined to drive them out come morning. Morning came. Courage left. I peeked at the door from across the kitchen, the way a child peeks at the ocean, curious, half afraid it will surge inside. Nothing moved. Sunlight settled over everything the way fresh snow settles, covering but not hiding. I pushed the thought away, put on the kettle, and tried to forget. I thought that would be the end of it. But nature had already chosen another page. On the third night, the creak returned at the very stroke of 3. The house held its breath. I found myself tiptoeing across the hall in wool socks, candle trembling in my hand, as though silence alone could protect an old woman from whatever waited below. I pressed my ear to the paint-chipped door and heard a slow, deliberate inhale on the other side. Not a dog. Dogs pant. Not a rat. Rats scurry. This breath sounded steady, patient, almost hopeful. I lifted the latch. It should have screamed. Instead it sighed, as if eager to tell its secret. I opened the door only an inch, and 2 amber eyes met mine. They weren't the flat chips of fear one expects from a cornered animal. They were deep liquid pools that reached out the way hungry hands reach for bread. The candle jumped in my grip. A narrow muzzle, red gold even in the dim, hovered just beyond the threshold. The creature held perfectly still, yet its eyes screamed a single word: help. A fox, a full-grown vixen by the size of her ears and the pale frost along her whiskers. She could have bolted, the crack was wide enough. Instead she stayed, breathing the air between us, trembling, but not from terror. She made a sound halfway between a whimper and a sigh. I swear I felt it settle inside my chest, like the flutter of small wings. My first impulse was to slam the door, lock it, light every candle in the house, and pray. Wild animals carry tricks you can't see: teeth, disease, hunger. Yet something in those eyes pinned my feet to the floor. I'd spent 40 years teaching children about life cycles, ecosystems, the silent intelligence woven through every leaf and feather. In that moment, the lectures felt like chalk dust, dry, distant, useless. Here was the heartbeat of the lesson, pulsing right in front of me, asking for nothing but space to keep beating. Slowly, I knelt. My knees cracked like old ice, but I forced them down. The fox remained motionless, except for the tip of her tail, which quivered so slightly it could have been a trick of candlelight. I whispered, "Why? I don't know. I won't hurt you." My breath fogged the gap. Her breath joined mine, 2 small clouds meeting and disappearing. "Please," her eyes seemed to say, "don't drive me away." I eased the door wider. She lowered her head, not cowering but bowing, and took a cautious step back into the cellar darkness. Her retreat felt like trust offered, not fear expressed. I could have chased her out with a broom, claimed my potatoes, restored the ordinary. Instead, I closed the door as gently as a mother tucking in a child, and laid an old quilt across the bottom to block the draft. All night I lay awake, listening to the faint, measured breathing below my floorboards, a living lullaby that both terrified and calmed me. At dawn, I warmed a pan of milk and carried it to the cellar. My hands shook, splashing white drops onto the stone steps. I set the pan near the door and retreated. Hours later, I returned. The milk was gone, the pan licked clean, not a drop on the floor. In its place lay a single, perfect feather, orange at the tip, like a flame caught in flight. Foxes don't leave feathers. They hunt birds, they shred them. Yet there it was, unbroken, laid with deliberate care, a token, or perhaps a thank you. That afternoon, the village boys shouted about stray dogs near the chicken coop. I stirred soup and said nothing. The secret rested under my roof now, fragile as spun glass. Every sense felt heightened, as though the fox's heartbeat had synced with mine. Was I protecting her, or was she protecting something in me I'd long forgotten? If only I'd known this was just the beginning. When dawn finally warmed the frost off the windows, I carried a small bucket of oatmeal and leftover chicken down the narrow steps, thinking I might catch a glimpse of her again. Half-light pooled across the packed earth, and something inside that light shifted, then multiplied. One russet back became two, then three, and at their feet spilled a tumble of tiny, wobbly shapes, fur soft as dandelion seed. I counted once, blinked, and counted again. 3 grown foxes, 5 kits. The cellar was no longer a hiding place for one frightened wanderer. It had become a nursery. At first, my pulse hammered so loudly I feared they'd hear it and scatter, yet no one bolted. They held a polite distance, as though observing rules older than either of us. One adult, the vixen from that first night, stood slightly forward, tail low, eyes bright but steady. Behind her, the other 2 adults fanned out, forming a silent guard. The kits tumbled between their legs, nipping tails, wrestling dust motes, blissfully unaware they shouldn't feel safe. I sank to my knees, the chill of the floor biting through my skirt. With slow, deliberate motions, I set the bucket down and spooned the food onto a cracked baking tray I'd found. The metal rang faintly. Every ear flicked toward the sound but stayed calm. Still, my hand trembled. Wild instincts can turn in an instant, and teeth are quick. My fear drummed so hard the spoon rattled. I almost dropped it, and in that clatter one kit squeaked, leaped, and landed nose first in another's belly. A ripple of playful chaos spread. The room filled with tiny growls that sounded like kittens gargling laughter. That was event 1. When I edged back, knees protesting, the bold vixen stepped forward. Her gaze never left my face. She sniffed the air, testing for danger, then lowered her head to the tray. The 2 other adults waited until she swallowed a mouthful. Only then did they approach. Hierarchy, even here. I caught myself smiling until one of the kits tottered straight toward my boots, sat down, and stared up as if I were the sunrise itself. Its eyes were blue-gray, cloudy the way new eyes often are, reflecting candlelight like a pair of wet marbles. My breath caught. Tiny paws flexed in the dust, undecided whether to flee or play. I held still, the world balancing on that one fragile heartbeat. The kit sneezed, shook its head, and scampered back to its mother. That was event 2. Minutes passed, or decades. Time blurred in that earthen twilight, before the vixen did something I swear no field guide could teach. She finished eating, licked her whiskers, and padded toward me. Not fast, not slow, deliberate, weightless, as if walking on thought. My throat tightened. I told myself not to reach out, not to threaten, but my palm rose of its own will, open and empty. She paused a breath away, eyes searching mine as though asking permission to exist. Then, with absolute gentleness, she lifted one forepaw and placed it on my outstretched hand. The touch was nothing, a feather, a whisper, but it crashed through me like thunder. Fear exploded first, cold, electric, ancient. What if claws sank in? What if she lunged? Instead, her paw rested soft, warm, trembling. I felt each fine tendon, the tickle of fur between pads. Tears welled before I understood they were coming. They fell hot on my wrist, each drop a confession that I was far, far smaller than the world I thought I ruled. My vision blurred, and through that blur, I saw trust itself made flesh. That was event 3, and it shattered me. When she withdrew, she did so with a dignity that felt almost royal. She turned, nudged the kits toward the food, then led them one by one to eat, always leaving the last bites for the smallest. The other adults circled, watchful, yet calm. I realized I was witnessing etiquette more refined than any dinner party gossip. Line, order, patience, lessons we preach to children, yet here they were practiced by paws and tails. Somewhere above us, a branch scraped the roof, reminding me spring winds would soon arrive. I thought they would leave once the weather improved. The idea offered a neat ending. They would vanish back into the forest. The cellar would return to shadows, and my heart could slow to an ordinary rhythm. But nature had already decided there would be no ordinary rhythm. Event 4 came as I stood to leave. The largest male, broad-shouldered, scar across one ear, stepped forward and emitted a sound I'd never heard from a fox, a low, breathy chuff, almost like a muted bark but softer, questioning. He dipped his head, not in aggression, but recognition. And in that simple gesture I felt permission to rise, to carry the empty bucket upstairs, to return tomorrow without fear. I closed the door behind me, quilt pressing against the gap to keep out drafts. My hands shook so violently I steadied them on the wall, tears still hot, yet my chest glowed as if someone had lit a lantern inside. I didn't fully understand it, but awe has never asked for understanding, only room to bloom. Outside, the sky was the pale blue of new ice melting. A mild breeze carried the first scent of thaw. The village roosters crowed, late to the hour, and for once their pompous cries sounded humble. Because under my roof, in a subterranean cradle, life had rewritten the rules of fear and kindness. And in that rewrite, I was both student and witness, blessed and bewildered. I wiped my eyes, laughed at myself, and whispered into the morning air, "Who will believe me?" The wind offered no answer, only the faint smell of damp earth, a promise of changes yet to come. And so I climbed the porch steps, already planning the next meal, unaware that trust, once seeded, grows faster than any season, spreading roots exactly where logic says it cannot. When rumors finally reached my porch, they rode on the sharp cluck panic of a missing hen. Old Mr. Larson lost one from his back lot. Feathers lay strewn like snowflakes against mud, and the tracks around the coop looked wild, he said, meaning outlaw paws and hungry teeth. By noon, 3 neighbors had gathered at the general store, voices low, eyes scanning tree lines the way soldiers scan horizon. Someone muttered foxes, and the word stuck to every ear like burrs on wool. I stood among flour sacks, heart thrumming, sweat beaded under my collar even though the stove at the back wasn't lit. "Stay calm, Maria." I bought bread and lamp oil, nodded politely, and slid out the door before questions could trap me. Only once the forest swallowed the road behind me did I breathe, and even that breath felt borrowed. Event 1, suspicion blooming like weeds. At supper, I sprinkled sawdust across the cellar steps to hide paw prints. I scrubbed the floor where kits had skittered, pushed burlap against the crack under the door. Every sound outside, an owl's call, a screen door slapping down the hill, sent a shock through my bones. The foxes sensed it. They moved softer than usual, paws ghosts against dirt. The kits, usually rowdy, huddled in a russet pile, whiskers twitching as though they'd dreamed the word trap too. I brewed chamomile and tried to drink courage, but the cup rattled against my teeth. When dusk bled into full dark, Torchlights bobbed beyond the orchard. 3 men, rifles slung casual as gossip. They paced the fence line, checking wire, planting steel jaws baited with raw chicken. I watched from my kitchen window, candle snuffed, hands gripping the sill so tight my knuckles ached. Just precautions, I heard one call to the other, but precautions slice flesh all the same. Event 2, the trap set. That night I did not sleep. Instead, I sat on the narrow wooden steps that led down to the cellar, one lamp burning low beside me. My ears strained for boots on gravel, for iron teeth snapping shut. The foxes remained silent shadows. Hours folded over each other like damp blankets. The ticking clock on the mantel felt cruel, counting out chances for discovery. Somewhere after midnight, a soft scrape sounded behind the door. I stiffened, expecting panic, but when the latch opened a hair's breadth, it was the vixen, the brave one, who emerged. She crossed the threshold with the grace of spilled water and settled on the step below mine. Moonlight, thin as parchment, slipped through the vent and glimmered along her back. She turned, looked straight into the hollow of my fear, and, without ceremony, lay down beside my feet. I froze, breath held, but she merely exhaled, a slow, warm sigh against the cool darkness, and then she did something that split my heart wide open. She rested her muzzle gently on my slippers. Event 3, fear disarmed by wonder. Her fur brushed the worn fabric, and the heat of her trust pooled around my toes. Tears welled before thoughts could argue. My terror collapsed into something raw and bright, a feeling that lives between sorrow and gratitude, too heavy for a name. I lowered my hand to her shoulder. She didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes, as though lending me her quiet. We stayed like that, 2 creatures bracing each other against a world sharpening its teeth. Outside, wind rattled the window latch. Inside, her heartbeat drummed steady against the boards, a living metronome telling me to breathe, just breathe. Minutes, maybe hours passed. Eventually she rose, gave a silent nod I swear meant hold fast, and slipped back into the cellar gloom. The latch clicked, and darkness settled once more. Yet in that darkness, a new light burned, the certainty that courage can travel from fur to skin, palm to paw, without a single word. I thought, in that fragile calm, the worst storm had blown through. But dawn was already forging another blade. The first warning came as a smell, sharp, resin-sweet, riding the noon breeze like a rumor you wish were a lie, pine pitch and scorched moss. I stepped onto the porch, napkin still in hand, and saw a bruise of smoke low against the horizon. It thickened while I watched, climbing the sky in ragged breaths. Within an hour, the volunteer siren screamed. By 2, the main road boiled with pickups, livestock trailers, and children clutching toys like life vests. Event 1, the village learning that fire owns the map now. Deputy Crane banged on my door, eyes watering under a yellow hard hat. Mrs. Petrova, mandatory evacuation, winds shifting, flames could be here by night. I thanked him, promised to pack, closed the door, and pressed my back against it, heart hammering. Below my feet, paws scratched, restless, smelling the same danger. I opened the cellar. Heat already seeped through the floorboards. The foxes paced, kits squeaking, adults scanning the air as if they could taste ember on every draft. I grabbed an apple crate, thinking to carry the little ones one by one to my truck. But the moment I lifted the first kit, it shrieked, a high, needle-thin cry, and latched tiny claws into my sleeve, shaking so hard its bones rattled. The vixen rushed me, not to bite but to nudge, pushing my arm down, gathering her pup back beneath her chest. Event 2, reason colliding with instinct. I understood then. The family would not scatter, not in terror, not for me. Moving them meant dragging 9 hearts through a gauntlet of flame and confusion. Kits that young tire fast, Smoke would choke them before we reached the river. Outside, another siren wailed, and my phone buzzed evacuation texts I didn't read. I knelt, palms open. "All right," I whispered, voice breaking. "Then I'm staying too." I filled buckets from the rain barrel, soaked blankets, and hammered plywood over the east windows where sparks might drift. Ash began to fall, first flakes delicate as moth wings, then thicker, grimy, tasting of metal. The world beyond the yard blurred into sepia. Event 3, the barricade against a moving hell. At dusk, the sky turned bruise purple, and wind slammed the house so hard the eaves moaned. I herded the foxes deeper, past shelves of preserves, into the crawl space beneath the stairs. Kits clung to their mother's tail like beads on a string. I spread soaked quilts over crates, creating a damp nest. The big male circled me once, muzzle touching my knee, as if assigning me sentry duty while he guarded Flame from the inside out. Smoke crawled through the keyhole. My eyes burned. The lamp sputtered from lack of oxygen. I wrapped a wet rag across my mouth and doused the cellar doorframe. Outside, a freight train roar rose, trees exploding one after another, sap turning to live steam. Heat pressed the walls, a giant's hand trying to crush the house flat. Event 4. The moment fear becomes an organ you feel pumping beside your heart. One kit bolted toward the stairs, panic blind. I lunged, snatching it mid-stride. Its heartbeat fluttered against my palm like a trapped hummingbird. The vixen watched, ears pinned, but did not strike. She let me tuck the trembling body under my jacket, next to my own ribs. There, huddled against me, the kit went still. "I've got you," I murmured, though I wasn't sure I had myself. Emotional anchor. I felt the kit shiver against my ribs, and it hit me. Life this small was trusting life this old to outrun fire. Minutes blurred into years. Flames hammered the roof. Joists creaked. But the stone foundation held, and the damp earth bled coolness. I told stories aloud, nonsense about moonlit meadows and endless snow, to keep my mind from picturing the roof igniting. Between tales I listened, the fox's breaths, my ragged lungs, the fire's distant howl. Together they formed a brutal lullaby no lullaby should ever know. Close to midnight, the roar softened to a rumble, like an ocean receding. Heat faded, replaced by the hiss of rain, nature's belated apology. I dared open the cellar door a crack, charred air, but no flames. The vixen sneezed, Kits mewled, the male shook ash from his coat. We were alive. I almost laughed, then coughed black grit instead. I thought that was victory wrapped in cinders, that we would simply wait for dawn and walk out to a wounded yet breathing world. I thought we would just sit it out, but nature was already scripting something else entirely. Smoke came back like a debt unpaid. Just before dawn, a new gust pushed the burned pine stench straight through the cellar vent, thick enough to paint my tongue with ash. Joists popped above us, little gunshots of shrinking wood, and a fine black snow sifted onto the quilts. The foxes stirred, restless, but it was the smallest kit that made the sound I feared most, a dry, rasping cough, too weak for terror, too strong to ignore. One cough, then another, like tiny fists knocking from inside its chest. Event 1, the fire's second strike, aimed at breath itself. I slid from the quilts, wrapped the kit in an old flour sack towel, and pressed the bundle to my chest. Heat rolled off his body. Each cough rattled my ribs. The vixen whined, circling my ankles. "I'll bring him back," I whispered, though I had no promise to trade, only hope, thin as a thread. The stairs creaked under my weight. Outside, the yard glowed orange, not flame, but reflected flame, the way a sunset stains water. Sparks skittered on the wind, hissing when they hit dew-soaked grass. I stepped onto the porch and nearly collided with a man in a bright red vest. He jerked back, eyes wide above a soot-smeared mask. "Ma'am, you can't be here. We're clearing the last houses." Then he saw the bundle. Is that? I pulled the towel aside. 2 soot-striped ears, 1 trembling nose. The volunteer's jaw dropped so fast I heard his breath catch. Fox? He managed. Event 2, disbelief meeting bare fact. This baby can't breathe, I said, and neither can the rest. They're below. He looked past me toward the open cellar door, then back to the kit, wheezing in my arms. Flames cracked somewhere uphill. The wind flipped his vest like a flag. Ma'am, I've orders to evacuate you now. He reached. Whether for me or the kid, I couldn't tell. I stepped back, tightening my hold. I'm not leaving without them, I said. My voice shook, but the ground under that sentence felt like granite. He hesitated, radio crackling at his shoulder. We're stretched thin, he muttered, almost to himself. Then, aloud, give me 5 minutes. He sprinted toward the road. I sank onto the porch steps, cradling the kit against my heart. His breathing hitched, tiny lungs fighting smoke. I rocked without meaning to, the way mothers rock whatever they love. I held him like a child, and he pressed into me as if he knew I'd never let him go. In that moment, I forgot the roof, the fire, even my own name. There was only fur, heat, and the stubborn rhythm of 2 hearts refusing to stop. Event 3, trust welded to flesh. Engines growled, spotlights carved lanes through the smoke. A rescue truck, then a wildlife trailer, lurched into view. The volunteer returned with 3 strangers in Nomex suits and faces too young for the lines of fatigue they wore. They carried stacked animal crates and a canvas stretcher. One took the kit from me with surgeon-delicate hands, slipping an oxygen mask the size of a teacup over his muzzle. The tiny chest rose, fell, rose again, less rasp, more breath. I tasted tears and ash together. Show us, another rescuer said. We hurried inside. In the cellar, the adults bristled, shielding the remaining kits. But when the vixen saw her baby, mask humming softly, she let out a low sound, half growl, half sob, and stood aside. One by one, the crew coaxed the foxes into padded crates, kits bundled together like glowing embers. The big male entered last, turning once to lock eyes with me, as if recording the map of my face for wherever memories live in foxes. Event 4, rescue sealed by a look that said, remember. On the lawn, the volunteers loaded crates into the trailer's soft red light. Someone draped a blanket over my shoulders, guided me toward an ambulance. I balked. Stay with them, I pleaded. A young woman with soot-silver hair touched my arm. They're going where you're going. You all ride together. Relief buckled my knees. We rumbled down the dirt track, past charred fence posts still smoking like spent candles. Around us, trees glowed inside, coal bones under bark. I thought of the cellar, now empty of everything but quilts and paw prints. I thought survival was the end of the story. Yet, as the truck jolted through ruts and the kit's whiskers brushed my thumb, I felt the story reaching farther, like roots seeking water beneath burnt soil. Somewhere behind us, the forest kept burning. Somewhere ahead, nurses and wildlife vets waited. Between those points rode a frail line of fur and an old woman who had gambled her last ounce of courage on the notion that life, once sheltered, deserves a chance to burn brighter than any fire that tries to take it. Word traveled faster than the fire trucks. By the time the wildlife trailer rattled into the county rescue center, my name, once just another entry in the church roster, rolled off tongues like a headline nobody could agree on. Some folks laughed, "Old Maria and her pet fox circus." Others whispered as though recounting a parable. She carried a baby fox out of the flames, cradled it like the Christ child. Every version grew new feathers before sunset, yet each carried the same bright ember. The entire family had survived. Event 1, gossip, sprouting in cinders. Inside the triage barn, fluorescent lights hummed above rows of kennels. Nurses in green scrubs checked vitals while volunteer vets cataloged burns and smoke damage. When they opened the first crate, the big male fox stepped out, shook ash from his coat, and, instead of bolting, walked a deliberate circle around the room as if inspecting our efforts. Laughter rippled through the staff. One tech whispered, "He's auditing us." Minutes later, the lead veterinarian approached, clipboard smudged with paw prints. "Good news," she said, eyes shining. "Every fox's lungs are clear, pads burned, whiskers singed, but nothing beyond time and salve can't mend. They're all alive and curious." Relief hit me so hard, my knees threatened to fold. Event 2, a verdict of life. While staff prepped injections, I hovered by the kit's cage. 4 little faces peeked over a towel, but the smallest, the one I'd carried, curled in the corner, tail tight, refusing the syringe of rehydration formula. A vet knelt, gentle as dawn. "He won't swallow," she murmured. "Stress, maybe." I reached through the bars, fingers trembling. The kit opened his eyes. Gray turned silver under the lights, and inched forward. He ignored the formula, pressing his forehead against my knuckle instead. The room fell silent, save for the slow beep of a monitor. He wouldn't eat from anyone else. He just stared at the door until he saw me. My throat closed around a sob made of gratitude and guilt intertwined. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here we share the truth nature keeps hidden. Event 3. Trust refusing to dilute. The vet handed me a tiny dropper. "How about you try?" I dripped formula onto my fingertip, touched it to the kit's lips. He licked once, then again, then latched on as though my skin alone turned liquid to milk. Applause burst from 2 volunteers. One wiped his eyes with a smoke-blackened sleeve. "I'll be damned," he whispered. "Animals remember kindness." His words, echoed an hour later on the evening broadcast, became the line every radio host repeated, "Animals remember kindness." The local anchor, blazer dusted with ash, stood before a backdrop of scorched pines and declared, "In a week of destruction, one small miracle reminds us we're judged by how we treat the helpless." Hearing it through the clinic's TV, I felt both exposed and strangely buoyant, like someone had opened a window in my ribs and let sunlight pour straight onto the floor. Event 4, the world looking in. But not all eyes softened. Online comments fluttered through the volunteer tablets. "Should have let nature cull its own." "Old ladies meddling. Now taxpayers foot the bill." I winced, until the tech holding that tablet turned it off with a snap and said, "Ignore the static. Your heart beats louder." He was right. I could feel it pulse in every fingertip, synchronized with the kit's slow swallowing. Night settled over the barn. Staff dimmed lights, the foxes nested in straw-lined crates, and still a trickle of townspeople drifted through the doorway, peering at the orange tails like pilgrims before relics. One boy, freckles masked in soot, asked if foxes could really feel thankful. The vet glanced at me. I crouched beside him, resting a hand on the crate where the vixen dozed. "They feel something that looks a lot like thanks," I said. "And maybe that's enough to call it by the same name." False ending, I nearly believed. I thought the foxes would settle, heal, and fade from headlines, leaving me to my quiet porch and cooling tea. But stories, like embers, flare whenever wind touches them, and wind was gathering just beyond the barn doors, because by morning, rescue teams planned to relocate the family to a wildlife sanctuary 2 counties north, and reporters already angled for live footage of the release. The smallest kit still slept tucked against my sweater, nursing drops of formula and a bond no interview could summarize. I wanted to let him go, yet every pulse whispered, "Hold on." Whether the world chose laughter or awe no longer mattered as much as the soft exhale I felt against my palm. A promise, perhaps, that kindness never vanishes. It merely changes dens. And somewhere outside, the burned forest waited for green shoots to write their own next chapter. I laid my head against the crate as the monitors beeped steady warm, and for the first time since smoke kissed the sky, I allowed my eyes to close, not in surrender, but in a faith stitched together by fur, flame, and the simple, stubborn memory of a creature who believed I would stay. 2 months passed, and the fire-blackened hills began to soften with new green, grass so bright it looked painted on the ash. The wildlife ward cleared the fox family at last. Lungs healed, coats thick again, kits now rangy teenagers bounding in zigzags across the exercise yard. When the rangers scheduled their release, I asked if I could be there, just stand at the tree line when the doors opened. They hesitated, citing protocol. I cited a promise I'd made in smoke and darkness. They gave me a single nod. Event 1, the homecoming staged at dawn. The transport truck growled up the logging road while low mist threaded between stumps and saplings. We stopped at the very edge of the surviving forest, a stand of spruce spared by some strange wind. Charred trunks bordered living ones like sentries who'd refused to fall. Rangers unloaded 5 crates, metal doors latched with quiet clicks. My hands shook so badly I pressed them into my coat pockets. "Whenever you're ready," the senior ranger said. They opened the first latch. The big male leaped out, nose high, reading wind like Braille. He turned in a half circle, then bolted into shadow. 2 more crates swung open. The other adults slipped after him, nearly silent except for a soft rush of needles underfoot. Then came the kits. No longer kids, really, but lean adolescents. They tumbled into the moss with the reckless joy of children let out of school. For a breath, I thought my part was done. I'd witnessed the forest would finish the story. I started to turn away when a slim orange figure appeared at the farthest crate, stepped down, and froze. Event 2, the world holding its breath. It was her, the first vixen, eyes clear as river glass. She surveyed the clearing, then looked straight at me as though 2 months were 2 blinks. Something inside my ribs unlocked. She came forward, one careful step, then another, while rangers stiffened behind me. Cameras clicked. 20 feet, 10, 5. She stopped, lifted her head, and touched her nose to the back of my hand. She approached, and simply touched my hand with her nose. I stood there, and I could not breathe. The world fell utterly silent, as if every pine needle listened. Her whiskers tickled the scarred skin near my thumb. The memory of smoke and sirens flashed behind my eyes, and for a heartbeat, I smelled burning wood again, but the scent faded, replaced by rain-damp bark and wildflowers pushing through soot. A reporter somewhere sobbed once, short and sharp, then covered his mouth. Event 3. Gratitude distilled into a gesture smaller than a word. She lingered only a second. Then she tipped her muzzle, almost a nod, and turned. The young foxes had paused mid-romp. At her cue, they raced ahead, tails streaming like orange pennants. She followed, melting into undergrowth until only the white tip of her tail flickered. A last tiny flag, then vanished. I stared at the space she'd left, hand still hovering mid-air. My lungs remembered their purpose and dragged in breath. Tears came so sudden they blurred the whole clearing. Spruce trunks smeared into dark watercolor stripes. Someone placed a hand on my shoulder. I didn't know whose. Event 4, the moment after the miracle, when you realize your heart is still beating. A ranger cleared his throat. In all my years, he didn't finish. Instead, he lifted his cap, pressed it to his chest, and looked toward the thicket, as if saluting a commander unseen. I thought that would be the end. Foxes free, humans humbled, the story folding neatly like a letter sealed. But as we loaded empty crates back onto the truck, I glimpsed a streak of red near the trees. The vixen had returned alone, watching us depart. She met my gaze one last time, then dipped her head, not in fear, not in farewell, but in something that felt like remember, we are still here. And in that final glance, I understood bonds do not end at borders of fur or skin. They travel the invisible paths between breaths, between seasons, ready to flare alive whenever trust calls them by name. I climbed into the cab, cradling the still warm shape of her touch in my palm, all the long drive home, knowing nature had etched a promise deeper than fire could burn. 6 months slid by like pages I never meant to turn. Spring healed the burn scars on the hills. Summer laid clover over charcoal, and autumn arrived carrying gold and silence. I spent the days knitting blankets for nobody, baking bread for the smell alone, sitting at the front window as the sun crossed the living room wall, measuring time in shadows. I told myself the foxes were busy weaving their own lives, hunting mice, teaching the young to stalk grasshoppers, curling beneath spruce roots when the rain drummed hard. I pictured them vibrant and unafraid. But honesty has sharp edges. I missed them with a hunger I felt behind the breastbone. Every creak of the porch made my heart rise, only to fall back empty. They were gone, rightly free. I was glad, mostly. Tonight, the moon hung like a dime over the ridge, frosting the yard in pale pewter. Wind rattled the dry oak leaves, and the house answered with its usual winter groans. I rocked in the parlor chair, mug cooling in my palms, eyeing the old cellar door as though memories could step through. At midnight, I banked the stove and headed for bed. That's when I heard it. 3 knocks against the shutters, soft, deliberate, impossible. For a moment, I thought the wind had learned to mimic knuckles. Then the knocks came again, patient as breath. My pulse slammed the walls of my throat. I wrapped a quilt around my shoulders, eased open the front door, and stepped into the night. Frost cracked beneath my slippers. The yard lay still. No engines, no flashlights, no neighbors chasing strays. I turned toward the porch steps, and there, illuminated by moonshine alone, sat a single adult fox. Event 1. Disbelief laid bare. Her coat had thickened to winter fire, brushed with silver along the muzzle. She made no move to flee. Instead, she gazed straight at me, ears forward, eyes calm and bright, reflecting a universe I thought I'd left behind. My breath bloomed in white plumes. Hers did too, mingling in the cold air like 2 spirits finally catching up. "Is it really you?" I whispered, voice brittle as thin ice. She blinked, slow, as if to say yes and yes again. Something inside my chest folded, then unfolded into a tremor of joy so fierce it hurt. Event 2. The bridge between worlds rebuilt in a heartbeat. I took 1 step closer. She rose, no tension in the muscles, no fear, and closed the distance herself. She stopped inches from my shin. The porch light stayed dark, only moonlight haloed her whiskers. Wind caught the quilt, flared it around my ankles like an old flag of truce. I knelt, joints stiff, and rested one hand on the wooden rail to steady the trembling. She leaned forward, slow, sure, and touched her nose to my fingertips. Not a sniff for scent, not a beg for food, just a quiet confirmation. I remember you. Do you still remember me? The contact lasted a heartbeat, 2, 3, enough for the earth beneath us to spin a mile. Emotional anchor. She approached and simply touched my hand with her nose. I knelt there, unable to breathe, while the night bowed its head. Event 3. Farewell, written in silence. She stepped back, sat, and tilted her head toward the tree line as though listening to distant music. I followed her gaze but saw only darkness woven between trunks. When I looked again, her eyes met mine one last time. In them glimmered something like thanks, yet deeper, an echo of every unspoken promise that passes between living hearts. You kept me safe. I carry that safety wherever I go. Then, with the grace of falling snow, she turned. I watched her descend the steps, paws whisper soft on frosted boards, tail floating behind like a candle flame stretched thin. Halfway across the yard, she paused, glanced over her shoulder. Goodbye stamped in gold on amber eyes, then melted into shadow so seamlessly it seemed the forest had swallowed light itself. Event 4. The instant after wonder, when reason searches for purchase and finds none. I stood rooted to the boards, quilt slipping from my shoulders, cold unnoticed. The porch lamp finally flickered on, power surge or maybe fate's belated spotlight, but it illuminated only empty yard, paw prints already crusting with frost. I pressed a palm to my racing heart. In its staccato, I heard the clatter of that burning night, the small lungs coughing smoke, the quiet trust of fur against skin. I heard the crate swinging open, the hush when she first touched my hand, the ranger's whisper, "Animals remember kindness." And now, they remember farewells too. I don't know how long I stayed there. Eventually, the chill gnawed through skin to bone, and I shuffled inside, closing the door with reverence usually reserved for church sanctuaries. I poured the cold tea into the sink. The steam that rose smelled faintly of pine. Half a year had passed since any fox trod these boards. My mind insisted the visit could not be real. Foxes don't knock, they don't travel miles simply to say goodbye. But my heart, still warm where her nose had rested, answered with certainty older than logic. She knew I was waiting. I don't know why she came, but I know for certain she knew I was waiting. And if that's not a miracle, then what is? If your heart is now full of reverence, right, nature is wiser than us.